Fobzu began as a cottage industry. We gathered for the first time, I think, in late 1977 in Elizabeth Munro's Montague Square flat. There were about 7 of us. Eleanor Aitken was there with Liz Munro, Roger Owen from Reading University, who then went to Harvard, Keith Cowell from Chatham House, Peter Mansfield, the historian, Roger Hardy, who later played a big role in The Friends. We were all there getting rather excited by the international picture, and of course all of those people I just mentioned had experience of the West Bank, and then the decision was taken to start The Friends. And things took off very, very quickly. From 77, I think, The Friends were founded officially in 78, and very soon we were planning our first visitors to go over to Bears-8 University to do some teaching and to generally help raise morale. Overseas visitors were very important for the university then. The numbers of people applying to become members was quite extraordinary. We were rather overwhelmed. We were just a little team, and the applications were coming through old-fashioned mail, fast and furious. So all of that administration had to be dealt with on top of our everyday jobs. So the first purpose, I think, was to get the word out that we existed. And then, of course, Elizabeth, with her very prestigious group of friends, I mean, we had Albert Hourani, who had recently retired from being director of the Middle East Centre at St Anthony's, Teddy Hodgkin, who had been deputy editor of the Times, were amongst the most illustrious characters. But then we had the academics like Peter Mansfield and Keith Cowell. All of these people helped to write letters to the Times at key moments. In terms of advocacy, of course, we had the contacts, so we would talk around London and Whitehall and with the people in the PLO offices, Palestinians based in this country who were academics, and we would plot and plan to get materials out to the West Bank, to get speakers out to the West Bank, and generally serve as a platform of advocacy here in Britain, in particular to draw attention to the mistreatment, in this case specifically, of students trying to get access to education, the right to an education, freedom, academic freedom, human rights. So we became more than, I think, just a society supporting academic freedom. We did also use the platform to draw attention to the situation more generally. In 1974, you had recognition of the PLO as the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians. So that was a great boost for Palestinians in the West Bank. And then during the 70s, you had the step-by-step diplomacy by Kissinger. And then in 1977, President Carter made this move of suggesting that there should be a homeland for the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. And of course, now that sounds rather too little, but statehood had not really, it wasn't really on the cards at that period, although we were going around researching about the possibility of a statehood. And then in 1978, and you get Sadat's initiative, the peace treaty, which basically excludes the Palestinians, there are protests on the West Bank, and the Israelis clamped down really hard, and in particular on Bears-8 University, and you get the closure of Bears-8 University. There was a sense in those days of not knowing what to do next. So when Fobzu came along, I think it was a great morale booster actually for the students at the university, and certainly back here in the UK there was huge enthusiasm because it was one of the first societies off the ground. It became very clear that Palestinians were ready to give up an awful lot to get their education. This really mattered. I think sometimes here in the West, young people don't see it in quite the same way, but education is so pivotal to any Palestinian's future. That came across very strongly to myself and to everybody on the committee. There was, in the society, we all understood the very basic importance of getting an education. So I think we were prepared to go to considerable lengths to try and assist this process, get people from Bears-8 over here and to get both students and teachers over there. And it is quite remarkable that those who did go over there gave lecturers, people like Peter Mansfield, Roger Owen, Derek Hopwood, they gave their time. You know, they went over for a fortnight or so and gave them their time voluntarily, and always came back with a lot of information and then spoke to the memberships over here, and then that would trigger off new letters of protest in the Times. So it was a circular thing, really. I think one of my first visits wearing the hat of a member of the Fobzu was when I went to Ramallah. Birzeit University itself had recently been closed. Hannah Nasser, the president, had been deported, and one was very aware that, you know, this was occupied territory. There were Israeli military everywhere, and it was hard to think of children, students, being able to go to university. And when I got to Ramallah, the arrangement was, and I don't know how we arranged this, was to meet Albert Al-Jazarian behind some tree, I remember, at a roundabout. And when I got there was a tank, an Israeli tank there, so I kind of thought the meeting might be off. But sure enough, Albert emerged, smoking his pipe, and said, you know, we just walk slowly across this roundabout, Valerie, and I'll take you to where our meeting is going to be. So that's how it happened. And very much that was the kind of the feeling at the time. Palestinians were very careful about what they did. Another time, I remember going into the university itself, how struck I was that at the orderliness of it, that, you know, the pebbles were painted white to show the way for cars, the teaching rooms, although not furnished greatly, it was really encouraging. And I remember meeting Gabi Baranki and Hanan Ashrawi, who was then, I think, on the teaching English staff at the university, and handing over my clutch of materials, The Economist magazine, at that meeting, and being brought up to date with what had happened with Hannah Nasser being deported and the difficulties that the university were going through. So as an outsider, it was a learning process for me. You know, I was in my early 30s. It was a learning process, and we would take these stories home. Closures hadn't officially become closures at that point, but settlement building was very ongoing, fast, and the students found it difficult to get from place to place. You would feel very hemmed in, closed in, access to education poor, tremendous poverty, no hope, and the outside world up to that point not taking very much notice. Fobzu definitely helped to expand my horizons with regard to the Palestinians, because my ordinary work would take me into discussing the politics, but it was really important to get experience of how people felt at the grassroots and how important education was. So I would say, yes, that has been an important input into my outlook when writing about Palestine.